I'm going to teach you a language right now. In the next 5 minutes, not fluently, obviously, but I'm going to show you something that most language teachers never tell you. Something that Richard Feynman understood. Something that separates people who actually learn languages from people who spend years studying and can barely order a coffee. A pause. Put down the book. Here's what's crazy: you already speak a language. You already know how language works. You acquired your first language without memorizing a single grammar rule, without flashcards, without apps, without trying. You were a baby. You listened, you played, you communicated, and one day you spoke leniently. So why, when we try to learn a second language as adults, do we abandon that natural process? Why do we memorize vocabulary lists? Why do we drill grammar rules? Why do we treat language learning like we're memorizing the periodic table? Because that's how schools teach it. And it's completely wrong. Fact, direct statement: Richard Feynman learned multiple languages. Not perfectly, but functionally. Enough to give lectures in Portuguese. Enough to read scientific papers in German and Russian. Enough to communicate with colleagues around the world. And he never memorized vocabulary lists. Never drilled verb conjugations. Never used flashcards. He had a method based on how the brain actually acquires language. The same method that made him a genius at physics. The same method that let him understand anything deeply and quickly. And today, I'm going to teach you that method. Because once you understand it, you'll realize you've been learning languages wrong your entire life. See, walk across stage. Let me start with a story that reveals everything. It's 1951. Feynman accepts a visiting professorship in Brazil. At the Center for Physical Research in Rio de Janeiro, he's going to teach physics to graduate students. There's just one problem: he doesn't speak Portuguese. Most people would panic. They'd buy a Portuguese course. They'd hire a tutor. They'd spend months before going, memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. We share what Feynman does. Feynman does something different. He gets on a ship to Brazil. This is before easy flights. And on the ship, he has about 2 weeks. He doesn't study Portuguese grammar. He doesn't memorize vocabulary lists. Instead, he finds Portuguese speakers on the ship, and he just talks to them, or tries to. He gestures. He uses cognates. He makes mistakes. He plays with the language. 2 weeks. No formal study. Just immersion and play. It will reveal the result. He arrives in Brazil, and within a month he's giving physics lectures in Portuguese. Not perfect Portuguese. Not literary Portuguese, but functional, communicative Portuguese. His colleagues are shocked. How did you learn so fast? And Feynman says something that reveals his entire method. I didn't learn Portuguese. I acquired it. There's a difference. Opposite of that difference between learning and acquiring. That's the secret. That's what separates geniuses from people who study for years and learn nothing. Let me explain what this means. If I could explain this carefully, when you learn a language the traditional way, you're using your conscious mind. You're memorizing rules. You're studying grammar. You're translating in your head, English to French, French to English, always thinking about the language. But when you acquire a language, you're using the same part of your brain that learned your first language, the language acquisition device. The part that doesn't memorize, it absorbs, it patterns, it internalizes. Hey, make the contrast: learning is conscious and slow. Acquiring is unconscious and fast. Learning requires effort and feels like work. Acquiring feels natural and happens automatically. Learning gives you knowledge about the language. Acquiring gives you the ability to use the language. Pack point. And here's the key insight that Feynman understood. The brain can't learn language through memorization. It can only acquire it through comprehensible input and meaningful use. You can memorize 1,000 vocabulary words, but if you've never heard those words in context, never used them in communication, never encountered them in meaningful situations, you don't really know them. They're just isolated facts in your head. Tell another story. Let me show you what this looks like. Concrete example. Feynman wants to read German physics papers, important papers, cutting-edge research, but they're in German, and he doesn't speak German. Most physicists would either avoid the papers or rely on translations. Some might take a German class, traditional approach. Grammar first, vocabulary lists, gradual progression. Share Feynman's approach. Feynman just starts reading the papers in German, even though he doesn't know German. But wait, you're thinking, how can you read something in a language you don't know? Here's how he uses context. He uses cognates, words that are similar in English and German. He uses the math and equations as anchors. He guesses meaning from structure. He tolerates ambiguity. The first paper takes him 8 hours. He understands maybe 30%. But he keeps going. The second paper takes 6 hours, 40% comprehension. Third paper, 4 hours, 50%. He's not memorizing vocabulary. He's acquiring it by seeing words in context, by figuring out meaning from usage, by building intuition about how German works. Ask or reveal the result. After 3 months, he's reading German physics papers at near native speed. He never took a formal class, never memorized conjugation tables, never drilled vocabulary. He just jumped in, used comprehensible input, let his brain do what it's designed to do, acquire language through meaningful exposure. Make the point. That's the method. That's how geniuses learn languages without memorizing. They don't study the language, they use it. They immerse themselves in comprehensible input. They tolerate ambiguity. They let their brain acquire naturally instead of forcing it to memorize artificially. Cass addressed the skepticism. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's Feynman. He was a genius. His brain works differently. I can't do that. Or wrong. Your brain works the same way. Every human brain has the same language acquisition capacity. You proved it when you learned your first language. You didn't memorize grammar rules as a baby. You acquired language naturally through exposure and use. Kier explained, the reason adults struggle with language learning isn't because their brains changed. It's because they're using the wrong method. They're trying to consciously learn something that can only be unconsciously acquired. Let me show you exactly how to apply Feynman's method, the specific techniques he used that you can use starting today. As present technique, Technique 1, comprehensible input. This is the foundation of everything. Comprehensible input means content in your target language that you can mostly understand. But that's slightly above your current level. Not completely easy. Not impossibly hard. Just right at the edge of your ability. I will explain why this works. When you expose yourself to comprehensible input, your brain automatically starts noticing patterns. It starts connecting words to meanings. It starts internalizing grammar without you consciously studying it. But the input has to be comprehensible. If it's too hard, if you understand less than 50%, you're just hearing noise. Your brain can't extract patterns from noise. If it's too easy, if you understand everything perfectly, you're not growing. There's no new language to acquire. Can make it practically. So how do you find comprehensible input? For beginners, children's books, children's shows, simple conversations, content designed for learners. Anything with pictures or context clues that help you understand. For intermediate learners, young adult books, casual YouTube videos, podcasts on familiar topics, content where you can guess unknown words from context. For advanced learners, native content on subjects you already know, news about topics you follow, books in genres you've read in English. The Richard Feynman example. This is why Feynman started with physics papers in German. He already understood the physics. So even when the German was challenging, he had context. The equations were the same. The concepts were familiar. That made the German comprehensible. He didn't start with German poetry. That would have been incomprehensible. He started where he had maximum context to make the language understandable. Far present, technique 2. Technique 2, active contextualization. This is different from memorization. When you encounter a new word, don't memorize its translation. Connect it to its context. Build a mental image. Associate it with the situation. Or give example. Let's say you're reading a Portuguese story and you encounter the word cachorro, and from context you figure out it means dog. The memorization approach. Cachorro equals dog. Cachorro equals dog. Repeat 50 times. Put it in a flashcard. Drill it. The acquisition approach. Visualize the scene. There's a cachorro in the story. See it. Hear it barking. Notice what the cachorro is doing. Feel the word in the context of the story. Explain the difference. When you contextualize, you're not memorizing a translation. You're building a direct connection between the word and its meaning. No translation layer. Just like in your native language, you don't translate dog into a concept. The word asks the concept. That's what acquisition does. It builds direct connections. That's why it's faster and more permanent than memorization. Present technique 3, productive struggle. This is crucial and counterintuitive. Most language courses try to make learning easy. They break everything down into tiny steps. They don't let you struggle. They don't let you make mistakes. Get direct. But struggle is where acquisition happens. When you're trying to communicate and you don't know the word. When you're reading and you have to guess meaning. When you're listening and you have to infer from context. That struggle, that cognitive effort, that's what makes the language stick. Share Feynman example. When Feynman was giving lectures in Portuguese, he made mistakes constantly. He used wrong words. He messed up grammar. Sometimes he had to gesture or draw pictures to communicate. His students could have helped him more, could have corrected every error, could have made it easier for him. But he didn't want that. He wanted to struggle because he understood the struggle is the acquisition process. Make it practical, so when you're learning a language, don't avoid struggle. Embrace it. Try to speak before you're ready. Try to read things slightly too hard for you. Try to watch shows without subtitles. Try to communicate even when you don't know all the words. That discomfort, that's learning. That's your brain building new neural pathways. That's acquisition happening. Present technique 4, technique 4, pattern recognition over rule memorization. This is huge. This is what separates Feynman's approach from traditional language learning. Traditional approach, learn grammar rules. Study conjugation tables. Memorize when to use subjunctive. Understand syntax structures. Feynman's approach, notice patterns. Let grammar emerge naturally. Trust your brain to internalize structure through exposure. Explain. Here's what happens. When you expose yourself to enough comprehensible input, your brain automatically notices patterns. You start to feel what sounds right and what sounds wrong, not because you know the rule, but because you've internalized the pattern. This is how you learned your first language. You never studied grammar as a child, but you can feel when a sentence is grammatically correct in your native language. That feeling is pattern recognition. Give example, in English, we say, I want to go, not I want go. Why? Because there's a rule about infinitives requiring to in certain contexts. But you didn't learn that rule. You just heard want to together so many times that it sounds right, and want go sounds wrong, even though you might not know why. Make the application. That's what you want to build in your target language. Not knowledge of rules, but intuition about patterns. And the way you build that intuition is exposure. Massive amounts of comprehensible input. Your brain will do the pattern recognition automatically. You don't have to consciously study the patterns. As in present technique 5, meaningful communication over rote practice. This is the final piece, and it's what makes the difference between studying a language for years and never speaking it versus acquiring it quickly and using it confidently. Explain, rote practice is drilling, repeating phrases, doing grammar exercises, fill in the blank worksheets. All the stuff traditional language classes make you do. Meaningful communication is using language to actually communicate something you care about. Having real conversations. Reading things you're genuinely interested in. Writing about topics that matter to you. Make the contrast. Rote practice might help you pass a test, but it doesn't lead to acquisition because your brain doesn't care about meaningless practice. It doesn't encode information that isn't meaningful. But meaningful communication, your brain prioritizes that because communication matters. It's what language is for. Share example. When Feynman was learning Portuguese, he wasn't doing practice drills. He was talking to people about physics, about ideas, about things he cared about. That communication was meaningful. So his brain prioritized acquiring the language needed for that communication. If he'd been drilling verb conjugations, his brain would have treated it as meaningless, busy work. Minimal acquisition. Make it actionable. So how do you implement this? Don't do generic practice exercises. Find ways to communicate meaningfully in your target language. Write a blog in your target language about something you're interested in. Find language exchange partners and talk about topics you care about. Read books in the language that you'd want to read anyway. Pause. Bring it together, So those are the 5 techniques: comprehensible input, active contextualization, productive struggle, pattern recognition, meaningful communication. Together, they create a method that leverages how your brain naturally acquires language instead of fighting against it with memorization and rules. I address common concern now. Some of you are thinking, This sounds harder than just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. Isn't that more efficient? No, and here's why. Explain the mathies. Let's say you spend 6 months memorizing vocabulary and grammar. You learn 2,000 words. You know all the tenses. You've studied hard. But when you try to have a conversation, you can't. You're translating in your head. You're thinking about rules. You can't understand native speakers. You can't express yourself naturally. At contrast, now let's say you spend 6 months immersing in comprehensible input, reading, listening, trying to communicate, making mistakes, struggling. You might not consciously know 2,000 words. You might not be able to recite grammar rules, but you can have conversations. You can understand movies. You can read books. You can think in the language. Make the point, which method actually achieved the goal? Which method gave you functional language ability? Memorization gives you knowledge about the language. Acquisition gives you the language. Better from share personal story. Let me tell you about my own experience with this. I spent 4 years studying Spanish in school. Traditional method, vocabulary quizzes, grammar tests, conjugation drills. I got good grades. And after 4 years, I could barely order food in a Mexican restaurant. 4 years of study, almost zero functional ability. Continue. Then I discovered Feynman's method, and I started over with French, but completely differently. No grammar books, no vocabulary lists. I just started reading simple books, watching children's shows, trying to speak with native speakers online, accepting that I'd make mistakes, tolerating ambiguity. Share results of 6 months later. I was having hour-long conversations in French, reading novels, watching movies without subtitles. Not perfectly, but functionally. 6 months of acquisition beat 4 years of memorization. That's when I understood. The method matters more than the effort. You can study wrong for years and get nowhere. Or you can acquire right for months and achieve fluency. Get practical. So let me give you a concrete plan. Exactly how to use Feynman's methods starting today. Thus I present the plan. Week 1, find comprehensible input. For complete beginners, that means learner content, podcasts for learners, graded readers, YouTube channels for language learners. Content designed to be comprehensible at your level. Week 2, consume that input daily, 1 hour a day minimum. Read or listen. Don't try to memorize. Don't translate every word. Just try to understand the general meaning. Get comfortable with ambiguity. Week 3, start trying to produce. Write simple sentences. Record yourself speaking. Find a language exchange partner. Start using the language even badly. The productive struggle begins. Continue. Month 2. Increase input. Start consuming native content on familiar topics. If you love cooking, watch cooking shows in your target language. If you follow sports, read sports news. Use your existing knowledge to make the language comprehensible. Month 3, focus on meaningful communication. Join online communities in your target language. Comment on forums. Have conversations about topics you care about. Use language meaningfully, not just as practice. Month 6, immerse as much as possible. Change your phone language. Read books you'd read in English. Watch shows you'd watch anyway. Let the language become part of your daily life. I make the promise. Follow this plan for 6 months. Not perfectly. You'll miss days. You'll struggle. You'll want to quit. But if you stick with it, if you trust the acquisition process, instead of falling back to memorization, you'll be functionally fluent. You'll be able to communicate. You'll understand most of what you hear. You'll be able to read and enjoy native content. Hence, compare that to traditional methods, where after 6 months you've memorized vocabulary lists but can't have a conversation. Where after 2 years you still panic when someone speaks to you in the language. Address the fear. I know this method feels scary. It feels inefficient. It feels like you should be studying more formally, like you should have a textbook, like you should be memorizing. That's because our education system taught us that learning requires formal study. Memorization, tests, structure. But language isn't like other subjects. Language is a skill that your brain acquires naturally through exposure and use. Treating it like a subject to study is like trying to learn swimming by reading about it instead of getting in the water. Make the analogy, you wouldn't memorize swimming terminology and expect to swim. You get in the pool, you struggle, you splash around. You gradually get better through doing it. That's what language acquisition is. You get in the linguistic pool, you struggle, you make mistakes. You gradually get better through using it. quite share Feynman wisdom. Feynman understood this about all learning, not just languages. He said, if you want to understand something, use it, play with it, engage with it directly. Don't just study about it. That applies perfectly to language. Don't study about the language. Use it, play with it, engage with it directly. Tell final story. Let me end with one more Feynman story that encapsulates the entire method. A colleague asks Feynman, how did you learn to speak Portuguese so quickly? And Feynman says, I didn't learn to speak Portuguese. I learned to think in Portuguese. There's a difference. Explain. When you memorize and translate, you're still thinking in English. You think of what you want to say in English. You translate it to Portuguese. You speak. It's slow. It's conscious. It's exhausting. But when you acquire a language, you start thinking in it. You don't translate, you just speak. The thoughts arise in the target language. It's fast. It's unconscious. It's natural. Make the point, that's the goal. Not to know the language intellectually, but to think in it, to use it automatically, to have it become part of how your brain operates. And you can only get there through acquisition, not memorization. Hey, walk to center stage. So here's what I want you to understand. Really understand. You can learn a language, you have the capacity. Every human brain does. But you have to use the right method, the method that works with your brain's natural language acquisition system, not against it. Recap the method. Stop memorizing vocabulary lists. Start consuming comprehensible input. Stop drilling grammar rules. Start noticing patterns through exposure. Stop avoiding mistakes. Start struggling productively. Stop doing rote practice. Start communicating meaningfully. Stop translating in your head. Start thinking in the language. A fair final challenge, pick a language. Any language you've wanted to learn, or one you've been studying unsuccessfully, and try Feynman's method for 3 months. Just 3 months. Find comprehensible input. 1 hour a day, consume it. Don't memorize, don't translate, just try to understand. Then try to use it even badly. Make the promises 3 months from now, you'll understand more of that language than you did from years of traditional study. Not because you're smarter, not because the method is magic, but because you're finally working with your brain's natural language acquisition system instead of fighting against it. Pause, that's how geniuses learn languages without memorizing. They don't. They acquire naturally, the way your brain is designed to. Czar Smilos, and now you can too. Thank you. And if you want more insights into how Feynman learned anything quickly, not just languages, but physics, mathematics, biology, art, anything, do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're uncovering the real learning methods behind genius, not study hacks, not shortcuts, actual cognitive science applied practically. Join us. Let's learn like Feynman learned. See you in the next one.
The BBC Studios, London, 1983. The camera is rolling. Christopher Sykes, one of Britain's most persistent science journalists, asks Richard Feynman a simple question. Can you explain in ordinary terms why magnets attract? Feynman stares at him for 11 seconds of dead air. Then he says something that makes Sykes visibly uncomfortable. I can't explain that attraction in terms of anything else you're familiar with, because I don't understand it in terms of anything else. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist who revolutionized quantum mechanics just admitted he doesn't understand magnets. But here's what Sykes didn't know, and what's buried in 17 pages of Feynman's lecture notes from Cornell. That answer was deliberate misdirection. Feynman understood magnetic fields better than almost anyone alive. What he was really saying would dismantle everything physics students are taught to believe. This comes from the documented BBC Horizon interview, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out, filmed months before Feynman's cancer diagnosis. The full exchange runs 4 minutes. Physics professors still show it to graduate students, but they always stop the tape at the wrong moment. They miss what Feynman says next, and more importantly, what he demonstrated in a 1964 Cornell lecture that was witnessed by over 200 students and recorded in Volume 2 of The Feynman Lectures on Physics. Because when you read Chapter 1 of that volume alongside his private correspondence with colleagues, a pattern emerges. Feynman wasn't just teaching electromagnetic theory differently, he was systematically undermining the way every textbook in the world explained fields. Cornell University, fall 1964. Feynman walks into Physics 2:27, Advanced Electromagnetism, and immediately erases the board. A student had drawn the classic diagram, field lines radiating from a charged particle, neat arrows curving through space. Standard visualization. Every freshman physics student knows it. Feynman stares at the drawing. Then he says, "This is a lie. Not an approximation, not a simplification, a lie." The lecture hall goes silent. He asks the class a question. What is a field? Hands go up. Expected answers flow. A region of space where forces exist. A vector quantity at every point. The thing that mediates electromagnetic interaction. Feynman writes each answer on the board. Then beneath them, in letters twice as large, he writes, "These are all descriptions of what fields do. None of you told me what a field is." The problem, as Feynman saw it, was this. Physicists had spent 70 years building incredibly sophisticated mathematical machinery to calculate field behavior. Maxwell's equations, vector calculus, tensor formulations, all magnificent tools. Students memorized div E equals RO over epsilon 0. They could solve boundary value problems, calculate Poynting vectors, derive wave equations. But somewhere in all the mathematical virtuosity, everyone stopped asking whether fields actually existed, not as mathematical conveniences, as physical things occupying space. Back to that Cornell classroom. A student, his name was David Merman, later a distinguished physicist himself, asks the obvious question. "Professor Feynman, are you saying electromagnetic fields aren't real?" Feynman's response is documented in Merman's 1989 memoir. He said, "I'm saying you've been taught to think they're real, without anyone ever defining what real means in this context." Then he does something unexpected. He asks them to explain what fills the space between a magnet and a paperclip. The answers come fast. The magnetic field. Lines of magnetic flux. Field vectors at each point. Feynman waits. Then, "You're using the thing you're trying to explain as the explanation itself." This is where it gets uncomfortable, because what Feynman revealed next, documented across 3 consecutive lectures in November 1964, contradicted 70 years of physics pedagogy. He walks them through the history. Faraday, 1831, discovers electromagnetic induction, doesn't know mathematics, thinks in pictures, imagines lines of force threading through space. Useful metaphor. Maxwell, 1865, translates Faraday's intuition into equations. Even more useful. The equations work magnificently. They predict electromagnetic waves. They unify electricity and magnetism. They're confirmed by every experiment. But here's what happened. According to Feynman's analysis, physicists started treating the mathematical field, a calculational device, as if it were a physical substance permeating space. The map became the territory. But then, and this is the part that makes physics professors uncomfortable, Feynman points out that you can derive the exact same predictions using an entirely different framework. He introduces what he calls the potentials first approach. Instead of saying electric and magnetic fields are fundamental, you treat them as derivatives of more fundamental potential functions. Same experimental predictions, same physics. Completely different ontology. The electromagnetic field, in this view, isn't a thing vibrating through space. It's a mathematical relationship between potentials. A student asks, voice uncertain, "So, which one is true, fields or potentials?" Feynman's documented response. Physics doesn't answer which is true. Physics answers which is useful for this calculation. The lecture hall erupts. Students who spent 4 years memorizing field theory suddenly realize they've been operating on hidden assumptions. One student, this is recorded in the lecture notes archived at Caltech, says, "But professor, you wrote a whole textbook on quantum field theory." Feynman grins. That grin is described by multiple witnesses. He says, "I wrote a textbook on quantum field theory mathematics. Don't confuse the math with what's actually happening in nature." To understand why this bothered Feynman so deeply, we need to go back to his MIT undergraduate days, 1936. He's reading Dirac's Principles of Quantum Mechanics, the most abstract physics text in existence. Dirac introduces field operators, creation and annihilation operators, second quantization, brilliant mathematics. But young Feynman keeps asking his professors, what's being created? What's being annihilated? No satisfying answers, just, don't worry about it, the math works. This frustration haunts him for decades. By the time he's teaching at Cornell, he's determined his students won't graduate with the same hollow understanding. This wasn't just about electromagnetic fields, but about how physicists mistake mathematical formalism for physical comprehension. The distinction matters, because when you memorize, the electromagnetic field has energy density. U equals epsilon 0. E squared over 2 plus B squared over 2 mu 0. You're learning a calculational recipe. When you ask, what is this energy? Where is it located? Does it have independent existence? You're doing physics. Feynman's entire pedagogical mission was forcing students into the second category. He demonstrates this with a thought experiment, documented in Lecture 2-11, two charged particles in space separated by distance. Conventional explanation, particle A creates an electric field filling all of space. Particle B feels this field at its location. Field does the mediating. Feynman's alternative, particle A has a potential function that determines particle B's behavior according to action at a distance. No field needed. Same predictions. He writes both mathematical frameworks on the board, side by side, asks the class which is really happening. The silence lasts 30 seconds, because they're realizing there might not be an answer. But then, just when students think they're getting comfortable with maybe we can't know, Feynman introduces retardation. This is where it gets genuinely strange. When particle A moves, particle B doesn't respond instantly. There's a time delay, light speed delay. Something has to carry the interaction across the gap. Now suddenly the field framework looks more physical again. Information propagates through space at finite speed. That propagating information, that ripple of influence, isn't that what we mean by a field? Feynman's response is documented in his correspondence with John Wheeler from 1965. Or it means space-time geometry itself carries the interaction, and what you call a field is just your description of curved spacetime's effect on particle trajectories. This reveals why most physics students memorize without understanding. They're taught to solve problems, not question foundations. A student can graduate with a physics PhD, publish papers using quantum field theory, calculate Feynman diagrams with facility, and never once ask, what ontological status do these fields have? The education system actively discourages the question. When students ask it, professors say, that's philosophy, not physics, or the math works, that's what matters, or you'll understand after you've solved more problems. But they won't, because the understanding they're seeking doesn't come from more calculations. It comes from admitting that physics is built on useful models, not metaphysical truths. You've experienced this exact confusion if you've ever studied quantum field theory. The textbooks tell you particles are excitations of underlying quantum fields. Photons are excitations of the electromagnetic field. Electrons are excitations of the electron field. Clean story. Makes intuitive sense. Then you learn quantum fields are operator value distributions on space-time, not physical things. Mathematical objects. So, what's being excited? The textbook moves on to calculating scattering amplitudes. Your question hangs unanswered. Feynman's approach to field explanation was fundamentally different from every physics textbook written before or since. He refused to use field lines, called them a crutch for people who can't think in vector calculus. He refused to treat Maxwell's equations as fundamental laws, called them useful summaries of electrostatic and magnetostatic observations, plus the displacement current term Maxwell added to make waves work. Most radically, he refused to say whether fields exist or not. He said the question was scientifically meaningless until you defined exist precisely enough to make testable predictions. But here's what he did teach, and this is documented across hundreds of pages of lecture notes. Think in terms of what's measurable. You can measure forces on charges. You can measure energy and momentum transfer. You can measure the trajectory of particles. Everything else, fields, potentials, virtual particles, wave function collapse, is interpretive framework, useful or useless depending on the problem. The greatest physics error is mistaking your interpretive framework for reality itself. A student asks, documented in the lecture archives, "So electromagnetism isn't real?" Feynman's response is worth quoting in full. Electromagnetism is as real as anything we know. But when you ask whether the electromagnetic field is real, you're asking whether your particular mathematical description corresponds to something ontologically primitive, and physics has no method to answer that. He continues, "The field is real in the sense that it lets you calculate real effects. It's not real in the sense of being the unique, fundamental way nature operates. Nature doesn't care about your mathematical description." This created an existential crisis for serious physics students. Because if you can't say what fields are, how can you claim to understand electromagnetism? Feynman's answer: you understand electromagnetism when you can predict electromagnetic phenomena using whatever mathematical tools work best for the problem. Sometimes that's fields, sometimes that's potentials, sometimes it's Feynman diagrams representing particle exchange. The physics is in the predictions, not the ontology. The same principle applies today when MIT physics students memorize Div-Grad-Curl operations, but freeze when asked, "What does divergence mean physically for an electromagnetic field?" They can calculate it, they can't explain it, because they learned the mathematical operator without learning why that operator captures something meaningful about field behavior. The divergence of E tells you about charge density. But what is the divergence as a physical process? Most students have no answer. They were never taught to ask. This connects to a broader crisis in modern physics education. Online courses show beautiful animations of field lines morphing through space, slick visualizations of electromagnetic waves rippling outward. Students watch these animations and think they understand fields. But visualization isn't understanding. Feynman proved this in a brutal demonstration witnessed by his Caltech students in 1975. He shows them an animation of a classical electromagnetic wave, oscillating electric and magnetic field vectors perpendicular to propagation direction. Standard visualization. Then he asks them to calculate the wave's energy density using the animation. Nobody can do it, because the visualization shows field magnitudes, not field intensities, shows perpendicularity, not the phase relationships needed for energy calculations. The animation is aesthetically pleasing, but physically incomplete. You've felt this if you've ever watched a PBS Spacetime episode on quantum field theory and walked away feeling like you learned something, only to realize hours later you couldn't actually explain any of it. The video gave you the illusion of understanding through compelling visuals and confident narration. But genuine understanding requires confronting what you don't know. Feynman was merciless about this. A student once told him, "I think I understand quantum field theory now." Feynman's response: "Tell me what happens when an electron emits a photon." The student launches into the textbook answer about field operators and creation operators. Feynman interrupts. "No, tell me what happens, not what the math says, what physically occurs." The student can't answer, because nobody can. The math works. The physical picture is interpretation. This is why physics graduates often feel like frauds despite their degrees. They know how to manipulate symbols. They've solved problem sets, passed exams, maybe published papers. But when pressed on what quantum fields are, or whether virtual particles are real, or what the electromagnetic field is made of, they realize their understanding is hollow. They've been calculating without comprehending. And that hollowness, that gap between facility and understanding, creates profound imposter syndrome. Feynman's field pedagogy was designed specifically to prevent this, not by giving students answers about what fields are, but by teaching them to recognize when they're confusing mathematical models with physical reality. To be comfortable saying, "I don't know what's ontologically primitive here, but I can make predictions." To distinguish between operational knowledge, knowing how to use field theory, and metaphysical knowledge, knowing what fields fundamentally are. The first is achievable, the second might not be. He demonstrated this distinction in his final lecture on the fields at Cornell, December 1964. He puts two frameworks on the board, Maxwell's field theory on the left, Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory on the right. Both reproduce all electromagnetic phenomena. Both are mathematically consistent. but they have completely different ontologies. Maxwell, fields are fundamental, particles respond to local field values. Wheeler-Feynman, direct particle interactions with advanced and retarded influences, no fields needed. He lets the class sit with this for a minute. Then, both frameworks work. Both make identical predictions for every experiment you can design. So, which one is true? The class expects a trick answer, but Feynman's response, documented in student notes archived at Cornell, the question assumes nature picks one mathematical description as its operating system. That assumption is probably wrong. What he was revealing, though he never stated it this bluntly, was that physics isn't discovery of what nature is. Physics is construction of models that predict what nature does. The distinction seems semantic until you realize it changes everything. A discovery paradigm says, find the true equations, they reveal nature's essence. A modeling paradigm says, build predictive frameworks, they reveal nature's patterns. Fields might be useful models. They might not be fundamental constituents of reality. The question is scientifically underdetermined. This philosophical position solved the problem that had plagued Feynman since MIT, how to do physics without getting trapped in metaphysical assumptions. You treat fields as tools. When field formalism gives clean calculations, use it. When it doesn't, use potentials or path integrals or whatever works. Switch between frameworks fluidly. Never commit to one as the truth. This pragmatic approach let Feynman make extraordinary discoveries: quantum electrodynamics, path integral formulation, Parton model, precisely because he wasn't locked into any single ontological framework. But it creates a deep tension for students trained to seek the answer. Modern physics education promises you'll understand how nature works. Feynman's honest version. You'll learn to predict how nature behaves, and you'll realize nobody knows why these predictions work. The electromagnetic field might be a fundamental feature of space-time. It might be an emergent phenomenon from deeper quantum processes. It might be a useful fiction that happens to match measurements. Physics can't currently distinguish these possibilities. The same crisis appears in modern physics beyond electromagnetism. String theorists can't say whether strings are real or mathematical constructs. Loop quantum gravity theorists can't say whether space-time is fundamentally discrete or whether discreteness emerges from their formalism. Quantum information theorists can't say whether information is fundamental or derived. Every frontier of physics hits this wall: powerful mathematics, unclear ontology. Feynman saw this pattern early and built his entire teaching philosophy around it. Don't pretend you know what's fundamental. Do predict what's measurable. Yet, here's the uncomfortable implication. If fields aren't necessarily real, and potentials aren't necessarily real, and we're just building predictive models, then what separates physics from sophisticated data fitting? Feynman's answer, from a 1982 lecture at Caltech. The difference is that physics models are constrained by deep symmetries and principles: relativity, quantum mechanics, gauge invariance. These constraints aren't arbitrary. They seem to reflect something fundamental about nature's structure, even if we don't know what that something is. The models aren't arbitrary, even if their ontology is uncertain. This brings us back to that BBC interview with Christopher Sykes. When Feynman says, "I can't explain that attraction in terms of anything else you're familiar with," he's not admitting ignorance. He's rejecting the premise that explanation means reducing one phenomenon to other familiar phenomena. Real explanation, in Feynman's view, is building a mathematical framework that successfully predicts observations and connects to other frameworks. Magnetic attraction connects to relativity, quantum mechanics, gauge theory. Those connections constitute explanation, even without a mechanical picture of how magnets pull. The problem is, students are never taught this. They're taught to crave mechanical intuition. They want to visualize field lines, imagine force carriers, picture virtual photon exchange. When the math gets too abstract, quantum field operators, gauge transformations, path integrals, they feel like they've lost understanding. But Feynman would say they had an illusion of understanding before. The mechanical pictures were crutches, True physics understanding is knowing which mathematical frameworks apply to which phenomena and why those frameworks are constrained the way they are. You're experiencing this right now if you studied physics and feel vaguely fraudulent about it. You sense the gap between what you learned and what you truly understand. That gap exists because physics education optimizes for problem-solving ability, not conceptual clarity. You can solve Maxwell equations without understanding what solutions represent. You can calculate Feynman diagrams without knowing if virtual particles exist. The system rewards calculation, not comprehension. Feynman tried to fix this at Cornell and Caltech. The fact that physics pedagogy hasn't changed in 60 years suggests he failed, or succeeded so thoroughly that physics departments couldn't handle the implications. Because accepting Feynman's view means accepting that much of what you learned as how nature works was actually, here's a useful model. It means recognizing that fields, particles, waves, and forces might all be equally valid or equally provisional descriptions. It means living with ontological uncertainty while maintaining mathematical precision. Most physicists can't do this. They need to believe their framework is true, not just useful. Feynman's genius was not needing that belief. His pedagogy tried to cultivate the same freedom in students. It rarely worked. Human psychology craves metaphysical certainty, even when science can't provide it. The final implication? If you can't say what electromagnetic fields fundamentally are, you definitely can't say what quantum fields are, because quantum field theory is built on top of classical field concepts. If the foundation is instrumentalist, fields as useful models, then quantum field theory inherits that status. This bothers physicists who want quantum field theory to be the fundamental theory. But Feynman's analysis suggests it's one framework among potentially many. Effective, powerful, predictively successful. Not necessarily describing what's ontologically primitive. Feynman's approach to another concept, how probability works in quantum mechanics, reveals an even more disturbing truth about what physicists actually know versus what they calculate. But that's a different story. One that begins with a lecture hall in New Zealand, 1979, where Feynman walks in and writes 3 words on the board that make half the audience leave. Those 3 words challenged 8 decades of quantum orthodoxy, and they reveal why Einstein's objections to quantum mechanics might have been more sophisticated than textbooks admit.
You know what's strange about the way people approach getting things done? They treat it like a battle against time itself. They make lists, they schedule every minute, they push harder and harder until they collapse. And then they wonder why nothing actually gets finished. Here's the real puzzle. The people who seem to accomplish the most aren't the ones grinding away 16 hours a day. They're often working less, enjoying it more, and producing work that actually matters. How is that possible? The answer isn't what you think. It's not about willpower or discipline or managing your time better. Those things help, sure, but they're missing the fundamental principle. The real secret is understanding what work actually is at the level of your brain. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong. When you sit down to work, you probably think the goal is to spend time working. That's the first mistake. Time spent is not the same as work done. You can sit at a desk for 8 hours and accomplish almost nothing. We've all done it. The second mistake is even more subtle. People think that if they just eliminate distractions, they'll be productive. So they find a quiet room, they close the door, they clear their desk, and then nothing happens. Or worse, something does happen, but it's the wrong thing. They spend 3 hours perfecting something that doesn't matter. Why? Because productivity isn't about removing obstacles. It's about understanding how the brain actually processes work. And the brain has some very particular rules about what it can and cannot do. Here's the first principle. The brain can only hold about 3 or 4 distinct ideas at once in active thought, not more. That's not a limitation we can overcome with practice. That's architecture. When you try to think about too many things simultaneously, the brain doesn't just slow down, it starts making errors. It drops pieces. It confuses relationships between ideas. Now watch what happens when someone tries to be productive without understanding this. They make a list with 20 items. They tell themselves they'll work on all of them today, Maybe they even assign time blocks. 9 to 10, work on the report. 10 to 11, respond to correspondence. 11 to 12, plan next week. But here's what actually happens in the brain. Every time you switch between tasks, there's a setup cost. The brain has to clear out the current problem, load in the new problem, retrieve the relevant context, and rebuild the mental model. That takes energy and time. If you're switching every hour, you're spending a huge fraction of your day just loading and unloading mental states. The really productive people, they don't do this. They work on one thing, maybe two if they're related, for as long as the problem demands. They let the brain build up a full, rich model of the problem space. And once that model is built, the brain can do something remarkable. It can work on the problem even when you're not consciously thinking about it. You've experienced this. You work hard on something, get stuck, go for a walk, and suddenly the solution appears. That's not magic. That's the brain continuing to process in the background. But it can only do this if you've given it enough focused time to build the model in the first place. Here's the second principle. Real work happens in bursts, not in steady streams. The brain has different modes of operation. There's a focused mode where you're actively manipulating ideas, and there's a diffuse mode where connections form more loosely. Both are necessary. Neither is optional. Think about reading a difficult technical book. You can't just read for 6 hours straight and expect to understand it. What actually works is reading intensely for an hour, then doing something completely different. Walking, washing dishes, staring at the ceiling. During that diffuse time, the brain is consolidating what you learned, finding connections, moving information into longer-term storage. But people don't structure their work this way. They think breaks are wasted time, so they push through, staying in focused mode until their brain simply refuses to cooperate anymore. And then they wonder why they're exhausted but haven't learned anything. The truly productive approach is different. Work intensely on one problem for 60 to 90 minutes. Not sort of working, not working while distracted, but really focusing every available mental resource on that single problem. Then stop. Completely stop. Do something that requires no mental effort at all. What happens during that break is critical. The brain reviews what just happened. It strengthens the important connections and weakens the irrelevant ones. It finds patterns you didn't consciously notice. When you come back to the work, you're not just rested, you actually understand the problem better than you did before the break. Now here's where it gets interesting. The third principle, the brain is remarkably good at knowing what's important, but only if you let it. There's a natural filtering system that sorts problems by urgency and significance. But this system gets overridden when you try to force everything to be equally important. Watch what happens when someone makes a list of 20 tasks and tries to treat them all as critical. The brain can't do it. It rebels. It chooses randomly, or it procrastinates on everything, or it picks the easiest tasks rather than the important ones. Why? Because when everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. The natural filtering system shuts down. The solution is counterintuitive. Instead of trying to do everything, explicitly decide that most things won't get done today. Pick one, maybe two, genuinely important problems. Tell yourself clearly and deliberately, these are the only things that matter today. Everything else can wait. The brain needs this. It needs to know where to allocate resources. Once you give it clear priorities, something remarkable happens. All that worry about the other tasks fades away. The brain stops spending energy maintaining those other mental states, and suddenly you have much more capacity available for the actual work. But here's the crucial part. Those one or two tasks have to be real work, not administrative shuffling. Real work means grappling with problems that don't have obvious solutions. Writing something new, figuring out why an experiment failed, designing something that's never been designed before, the kind of thing where you have to think. Most of what people call being busy isn't this. It's responding to correspondence, attending meetings, reorganizing files, making plans. These things feel like work because they consume time and energy, but they're not work in the deep sense. They're maintenance, and maintenance expands to fill whatever time you give it. Here's the fourth principle. The brain needs to see progress, not just activity. There's a feedback system that monitors whether effort is leading to results. When that system sees progress, it releases energy and motivation to continue. When it doesn't see progress, it shuts down. This is why people get stuck in procrastination loops. They start working on something difficult. It doesn't come together immediately. The brain's monitoring system says, "This isn't working. Let's try something easier." So they switch to checking correspondence or tidying their desk or planning. Those activities feel productive because they complete quickly. The brain gets its progress signal, and it feels good, but nothing important actually happened. And eventually, the brain notices this too. The result is a peculiar kind of exhaustion. You worked all day, you were busy all day, but you can't point to anything meaningful that got done. The way out is to change how you define progress. For difficult work, progress isn't finishing. Progress is understanding the problem better than you did an hour ago. Progress is trying an approach and discovering why it doesn't work. Progress is writing a rough version that you know isn't right yet, but that makes the problem concrete. Once you redefine progress this way, the brain's feedback system works with you instead of against you. You work for 90 minutes, and even if you didn't solve the problem, you understand it better. That's progress. The brain registers it as such and stays engaged. This connects to something deeper about how understanding actually develops. You can't force understanding. You can't schedule it. What you can do is put yourself in a position where understanding can happen. That means engaging repeatedly with a problem, looking at it from different angles, trying things that don't work, building intuition slowly. Think about learning physics or mathematics or any complex skill. The people who actually master it don't just study harder. They study differently. They work problems until they get stuck. Then they think about why they got stuck. They try to explain concepts in their own words. They look for multiple ways to approach the same idea. This takes time. It takes many sessions of focused work with breaks in between. But it produces something that memorization and grinding never can. Genuine understanding that stays with you and applies to new situations. Now, here's what all of this means for being productive. Real productivity isn't about doing more things. It's about making progress on things that actually matter. And to do that, you need to work with your brain's architecture instead of against it. Start by identifying one problem worth solving. Not 10, not 5, one. Something where progress would actually change things. Then clear away everything else, not forever, just for the next 90 minutes. During those 90 minutes, focus completely. No half attention, no checking other things, no multitasking. Just you and the problem. Work until you get tired or stuck, whichever comes first. Don't push past that point. The tired brain doesn't produce good work. It produces work that you'll have to redo. When you stop, really stop. Go for a walk. Make something to eat. Do anything that requires no significant mental effort. Don't feel guilty about this. This is part of the work. During this time, your brain is consolidating, connecting, preparing for the next session. Then, and only then, come back for another focused session. With a fresh brain, the problem often looks different. Solutions that weren't visible before become obvious. Approaches that seemed impossibly complex become manageable. Do this pattern twice, maybe 3 times in a day, and you'll accomplish more than most people do in a week of scattered effort. Not because you worked longer, but because you worked with purpose and with an understanding of how the brain actually functions. The people who seem impossibly productive aren't superhuman. They're not more disciplined or more motivated. They've just figured out this pattern, consciously or unconsciously. They protect their focus. They work on one thing at a time. They take real breaks, and they trust that the brain will do its job if they give it the right conditions. There's one more crucial piece to this. You have to become comfortable with leaving things undone. Not important things. Those get your focused attention. But all the small tasks, the administrative details, the things that could be done but don't really matter, these have to wait. This is harder than it sounds. We're taught that being responsible means handling everything promptly, but that's backwards. Being truly responsible means recognizing what's important and protecting your ability to do it well. Everything else is just noise. When you work this way, something unusual happens. You stop feeling busy all the time. Instead, you feel calm and focused during work sessions and genuinely relaxed during breaks. And at the end of the week, you look back and realize you accomplished more than you used to in a month. That's what real productivity feels like. Not like grinding, not like forcing yourself, not like battling against time. It feels like the natural result of understanding how the brain works and cooperating with it. The question isn't whether you can be this productive. You can. The question is whether you're willing to work differently than everyone around you, to focus on one thing when others are juggling 10, to take breaks when others are pushing through, to leave minor tasks undone when others are scrambling to handle everything. It takes confidence to work this way. You'll look like you're doing less, but you'll know something that others don't. Real work isn't measured in hours or tasks completed. It's measured in problems solved, in understanding gained, in things created that didn't exist before. That's the kind of productivity that matters. That's the kind that compounds over time, building on itself, creating something genuinely new. And it's available to anyone who's willing to stop fighting their brain and start working with it instead. Try this tomorrow. Pick one problem, give it 90 minutes of complete focus. Take a real break. Come back fresh. See what happens. You might be surprised at how much is possible when you stop trying to do everything and start doing something that matters. There's something else that happens when you work this way. Something that takes longer to notice but matters more than anything else. The quality of your thinking changes. When you're constantly scattered, jumping between tasks, always half distracted, your brain never gets to go deep. You stay on the surface of problems. You find the obvious solutions, the conventional approaches, the things everyone else would think of. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing remarkable about it either. But when you give your brain extended time with a single problem, something different becomes possible. After the first 30 minutes, you exhaust the obvious approaches. After 60 minutes, you start seeing patterns that weren't visible before. After 90 minutes, if you're really focused, you sometimes reach a state where the problem starts revealing its own structure. This is where the interesting work lives. Not in the first answer that comes to mind, but in the 5th or 6th attempt after you've tried the simple approaches and found them wanting. That's when you have to actually think, when you have to look at the problem from angles that aren't immediately obvious. Most people never reach this depth because they don't stay with any single problem long enough. They get uncomfortable with not having an immediate answer, so they move on to something easier, or they get interrupted and lose the thread entirely. Either way, they stay forever on the surface. The irony is that the surface is where everyone else is working too. So if you stay there, you're competing with everyone. Your work looks like everyone else's work. Your solutions are the same solutions everyone else finds. There's no advantage to be gained. But go deeper, stay focused longer, and you're suddenly in territory where few people ever venture. Not because it's forbidden or difficult to access, but simply because it requires sustained attention. And most people don't give themselves permission to work that way. This is where the compound effects start to appear. Each time you solve a problem at depth, you build intuition about how those kinds of problems work. The next time you face something similar, you start deeper than you did before. Over months and years, this adds up. You develop a way of seeing problems that others don't have. This isn't about being smarter. It's about being willing to sit with difficulty long enough to see through it. Anyone can develop this capacity. It just requires protecting your focus consistently over time. There's a final piece worth understanding. When you work with genuine focus, you're not just getting things done. You're training your brain to focus. The ability to concentrate is like a muscle. It strengthens with use and weakens without it. Every time you maintain focus, despite the urge to check something else, you're making it easier to focus next time. This means the method gets easier the longer you use it. The first few times, 90 minutes of unbroken focus might feel nearly impossible. Your brain will fight you, offering up every distraction and excuse, but stay with it. And within weeks, that same focus starts to feel natural. Eventually, it becomes your default mode rather than something you have to force. That's when productivity stops feeling like work and starts feeling like inevitability. You sit down, focus comes naturally, problems yield to sustained attention, and meaningful work happens almost effortlessly. Not because the work got easier, but because you've trained yourself to engage with it properly. This is what's possible when you stop treating productivity as time management and start treating it as attention management. Everything flows from that one shift in understanding.
What if the real problem isn't that you can't focus, but that you've been trying to force focus in entirely the wrong way? Most people treat concentration like a battle. They sit down, stare at their work, and try to wrestle their attention into submission through sheer willpower. When their mind wanders, they get frustrated and try even harder. It's exhausting, and worse, it doesn't work. The brain doesn't respond well to force. It responds to conditions. Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in something. Maybe you were reading a book and looked up to find hours had passed, or you were working on a problem and forgot to eat. That state wasn't achieved through willpower. Something else happened. The question is, what? And can we create those conditions deliberately? The answer is yes. But first we need to understand what makes focus so difficult in the first place. Here's what typically happens. You decide you need to focus on something important. Let's say it's a difficult textbook chapter or a complex problem you need to solve. You sit down with good intentions. For the first minute, maybe two, you're engaged. Then your attention starts to slip. You think about something you need to do later. You notice a sound in the next room. You remember a conversation from earlier. Each time, you pull yourself back, but it's harder. The mental effort of constantly redirecting your attention becomes more tiring than the actual work. Most people conclude they have a focus problem. They don't. They have a setup problem. The brain isn't designed to sustain attention on something it finds unmotivating or confusing. That's not a flaw. It's a feature. In nature, an animal that stayed focused on the wrong thing would starve or get eaten. The attention system evolved to scan constantly for what matters. If your brain keeps wandering away from your work, it's telling you something. The conditions aren't right yet. So what are the right conditions? Let's break this down into what actually works. The first principle is this. Focus follows curiosity, not discipline. You cannot sustain deep attention on something that seems meaningless or incomprehensible to you. Before you try to focus, you need to activate interest. This sounds backwards to people who think focus comes first, but watch what happens when you reverse the order. Instead of sitting down and trying to force yourself through material, spend the first few minutes finding something curious about it. Not something you should find interesting, but something that genuinely puzzles you. Look at the chapter title and ask, what question is this trying to answer? Flip through and find something that seems strange or surprising. The goal isn't to understand it yet, just to locate something your brain wants to figure out. This takes maybe 3 minutes, but it changes everything. Now, when you start reading or working, you're not forcing attention. Your brain is pulling towards something it wants to know. The difference feels completely different. The second principle, focus requires a clear target. Vague intentions scatter attention. I need to study physics is too broad. Your brain doesn't know what to grab onto. But I need to understand why this equation has that particular form. Or I want to figure out how these three concepts connect. Gives your attention system something specific to lock onto. Here's an experiment you can try. Take any difficult material, anything you've been avoiding. Before you start, write down one specific question you want to answer from it. Not what you're supposed to learn, but what you're genuinely curious about, even if it seems like a small question. Then read with that question in mind. What you'll notice is that your attention becomes selective. Information related to your question jumps out. Irrelevant details fade into background. This isn't magic. It's just how attention works. Give it a target and it stops wandering. Leave it without one and it searches constantly. The third principle might seem obvious, but most people violate it constantly. Remove friction before you start. Every small obstacle to working creates a decision point, and decisions drain attention. If you need to get up to find a pencil, that's friction. If you have to search for which page you stopped on last time, that's friction. If your workspace is cluttered with distractions, that's friction. Each one seems trivial, but they accumulate. Your brain learns that starting requires effort, and it resists. The solution is to prepare everything in advance. Lay out your materials. Open to the right page. Have paper and pencil ready. Clear your desk. Make it so that when you sit down, there's nothing between you and the work. This seems like a small thing, but it's the difference between a brain that resists starting and one that flows into it. Now here's where it gets interesting. These three things, curiosity, clear targets, and removing friction, they're not really about focus at all. They're about something that comes before focus. Call it momentum. The brain is very good at continuing what it's already doing. The hard part isn't staying focused, it's getting into focus in the first place. Think about a heavy door on a good hinge. Starting to push it takes real effort, but once it's moving, keeping it moving takes almost nothing. Your attention works the same way. The activation energy is high, but once you're engaged, maintaining that engagement is natural. This is why the first 5 minutes matter so much. If you can get through those first 5 minutes with genuine engagement, not forced attention but actual interest, the next hour becomes easy. But if you start wrong, if you try to force it from the beginning, you never build momentum. You spend the whole time pushing. So here's the complete approach. Before you even try to focus, do the setup. Find something that genuinely interests you about the material. Form a specific question you want to answer. Prepare everything so there's no friction. Then, and only then, begin. But there's something deeper happening here. Something about how the brain actually processes difficult material. Most people think focus means staring harder at something until it makes sense. That's not how understanding works. Real focus is active, not passive. It's asking questions, making connections, testing ideas against what you already know. When you're truly focused on understanding something, your brain is doing constant work. It's asking, does this make sense? How does it connect to what I learned before? What would happen if this part were different? Could I explain this to someone else? This active questioning is what keeps attention locked in. It's interesting. Passive reading or listening, no matter how hard you concentrate, always feels like work because your brain knows it's not really processing anything. Here's a strange fact about the mind. It can't stay focused on something it doesn't understand unless it's actively trying to understand it. Read that again. You can't concentrate on confused material by trying harder to concentrate. You have to change what you're doing. You have to engage with the confusion itself. Ask what specifically confuses you. Try to state the problem in different words. Draw a diagram, even if it's rough. Work an example with simple numbers. The moment you do this, something shifts. Your attention stops trying to escape because now there's something to grab onto. You're not just absorbing information, you're wrestling with ideas. The brain finds that interesting. Let's get practical. Imagine you're facing something genuinely difficult. A dense textbook chapter, a complex proof, a technical manual. The traditional approach is to start at the beginning and try to push through. This works for easy material but fails for hard material because your attention gives out before you make progress. Try this instead. Open to the middle of the section. Look at a diagram or an equation or a key statement. Don't try to understand it yet. Just look at it and ask, what would I need to know to make sense of this? Write down your guesses. Then flip back and scan for those pieces. What you're doing is creating a structure before you try to fill it in. Your brain now has questions it wants answered, and those questions guide your attention through the material. When you find something relevant, it clicks into place because you already have a slot for it. The focus required is much less because the work is organized. Here's another technique that works remarkably well. Before reading a section, close the book and write down everything you think you already know about the topic, even if it's not much. Just rough notes, whatever comes to mind. This activates relevant knowledge and creates gaps you can feel. When you then read, you're not starting from zero. You're building on something, correcting misunderstandings, filling gaps. The brain finds this much more engaging than trying to absorb new information in a vacuum. Now, let's talk about what to do when focus breaks, because it will. No one maintains perfect focus for hours. The question is what you do when you notice your mind has wandered. Most people do one of two things, both wrong. Either they get frustrated and try to force themselves back, or they give up and assume they're not capable of focusing today. Here's what actually works. Recognize the wander, don't judge it, and restart with a new question. When you notice you've been reading without comprehension, stop. Don't go back and reread mechanically. Instead, ask yourself what you were just trying to understand. If you can't answer, flip back to where you last remember engaging and find something specific to focus on. A particular sentence that seems important, a connection you want to explore, anything that gives you a new entry point. The restart is quick, maybe 30 seconds, but it reestablishes the conditions that allow focus. You're not forcing attention back, you're recreating the curiosity and target that make attention natural. Over time, you get better at this. Not because your focus muscle gets stronger, that's not how it works, but because you learn to recognize earlier when conditions are breaking down. You notice when you're reading without asking questions. You catch yourself before spending 20 minutes in a fog. The cycles of focus and refocus get tighter, and the overall quality of your engagement improves. There's something else worth understanding about deep focus. It's not constant. It pulses. Even when someone appears completely absorbed, their attention is actually cycling through different modes. Intense concentration for a few minutes, then a slight relaxation where the mind integrates what it just learned, then back to intensity. This is normal and healthy. The problem comes when you misinterpret the relaxation phase as losing focus. You panic and try to force intensity back immediately. This actually disrupts the natural rhythm. Better to recognize that after 10 or 15 minutes of hard concentration, your brain needs a moment to consolidate. Not a long break, not a distraction, just a slight easing. Look up, take a breath, think about what you just learned, then return. These natural rhythms, once you stop fighting them, make sustained focus possible. You're not trying to maintain peak intensity for an hour straight. You're riding waves. Intense focus followed by brief integration. Over and over. The overall effect is what we call deep work, but up close it's more like a heartbeat than a marathon. Let's pull this together with a concrete scenario. You have 3 hours to work on something difficult and important. A research problem, a complex text, detailed calculations, whatever. You want those 3 hours to actually count. Here's what works. Before starting, spend 5 minutes clarifying what you're trying to accomplish. Not a broad goal like make progress, but specific. What question will you try to answer? What understanding do you want to have that you don't have now? Write it down in one sentence. Then spend another 5 minutes setting up. Gather materials. Clear space. Open to the right page. Eliminate obvious distractions. Make it so that when you're ready, you can simply begin. Now, start, but not with the hardest part. Start with something related but slightly easier. Something that activates relevant thinking but doesn't immediately overwhelm. Maybe that's reviewing what you worked on last time. Maybe it's working a simple example before tackling the complex one. The goal is to build momentum before you need it. After 10 or 15 minutes, once you feel engaged, then move to the difficult core of the work. Now you have momentum, activated knowledge, and a clear question driving you forward. The focus you need is available because the conditions are right. Work for 30 to 40 minutes at high intensity. Then take a real break. Not checking other things, that's not a break for your attention system. Actually step away, walk around, look out a window. Let your mind go completely loose for 5 minutes. This isn't wasted time, it's when consolidation happens. Return and repeat. Each cycle builds on the last. By the 3rd hour, you're not trying to focus anymore. You're caught up in the problem. Your brain wants to continue. That's what real focus feels like. Not forced, but pulled. Here's what people miss. The quality of focus matters far more than the duration. 1 hour of genuine active engagement beats 4 hours of forced attention every time. Most people measure focus by how long they can keep themselves in the chair. But that's measuring endurance, not depth. Real depth comes from working with your brain's natural tendencies, not against them. The brain focuses easily on what seems important and comprehensible. When it doesn't focus, usually that means something about the task seems pointless or too confusing. The solution isn't to try harder. It's to make the work feel important by connecting it to genuine curiosity and make it comprehensible by breaking it into questions you can actually engage with. This might sound like it only applies to intellectual work, but the principles are universal. Whether you're learning something new, solving a problem, or creating something, the mechanics are the same. Find what's interesting, make it specific, remove friction, build momentum, work in rhythm, let the depth come naturally rather than forcing it. There's something almost paradoxical about focus. The harder you try to force it, the more it resists. But set up the right conditions, and it happens almost effortlessly. Not because focus is easy, but because you're finally working with your brain's design instead of against it. The real skill isn't learning to concentrate harder. It's learning to create the conditions where concentration becomes natural. That's the difference between fighting your attention and directing it. One exhausts you. The other energizes you, even as it challenges you. So maybe the question isn't how to force your brain into deep focus. Maybe it's how to stop forcing and start allowing. Set up the conditions. Ask real questions. Remove the friction. Start with momentum. Let the depth build naturally. That's not a trick or a technique. That's understanding how focused attention actually works and working with it rather than against it. If you found this useful, there's one thing worth doing. Try it. Take something you've been avoiding because it requires focus you don't think you have. Spend 5 minutes finding one genuinely interesting question in it. Set everything up, then start. Notice what happens when you stop trying to force focus and start creating the conditions for it instead. The difference might surprise you.